than 20,000 children in the UK growing up in families with same-sex parents. That's according to estimates from Stonewall, the LGBT charity. So what are the remaining challenges of gay parenting, and how best to navigate a society still geared towards the experience of heterosexual parents? Well, Sarah Hagger-Holt, a lesbian mother of two and author of Pride and Joy, a guide for lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans parents, joins me, as does David Ledain, father of two children who split from his wife on account of his sexuality and has authored a book called Gay Dad. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Sarah, I'll start with you. You have two children. Explain your family arrangements in terms of bringing them up and how you came to your family situation.
Well, I'm in a lesbian couple. I've been with my partner for about 15 years now, and about 10 years ago we started talking about having children and starting a family, and obviously LGBT people start families in a huge number of different ways, but for us we approached a gay male couple who have been long-standing friends to talk about starting a family together. So we co-parent with them. So our two daughters live with us, they're two mums, but they also spend lots of time with their two dads.
And you both had a child biologically each?
That's correct.
With each of those men?
Yes.
I think I've got that correct. But you know, the stories in both of these books, no two stories are the same, I have to say.
Absolutely. I mean, there's such a huge diversity.
Which we should say from the outset that all advisement and experience we recognise is specific to kind of each arrangement, which is why I know you were both very keen to get many voices into your respective books. David, just to go over your story for a moment. You were married to a woman for many years, you had two children before you separated. What happened there?
After the separation?
Well, in the lead up to the separation, and what drove that?
Well, my wife and I knew about my sexuality when we went into the marriage. That was clear, but I think we were both very naive. I thought at the time that I classed myself as bisexual. I would class myself now as gay, but I don't really like all these sort of labels and boxes that people put you in. But when the children came along, as in any relationship, heterosexual or whatever, the dynamics of the relationship changes because there's other people there. And the white elephant in the room was, of course, my sexuality, and that became an issue that we had to deal with. Eventually we split, we separated, but I was the main carer for the children, so I was the stay-at-home dad. So my wife left the family home, which was a very brave and courageous thing to do, and I carried on caring for my children.
And how did you come out to your children?
It's not an easy thing to do, and I chose the time very carefully. People give you lots of advice, well, you must do it now, you must tell them, but I held back because I know my children and I wanted them to feel safe and secure and have no worries or concerns. My wife and I separated when they were, I think they were 6 and 10, and for us that wasn't the right time for them to know that their dad was gay. Not that I think it would have made any difference to them. I mean, since they know, they're very blasé about it. You know, they live in a much more diverse world now than when I grew up in.
Yes.
It's a completely different scene.
But that decision, I mean, it's interesting in the 10 stories in your book about different men's different experiences. Many of whom were with women, had children, and then had to have that moment. They're all, as you say, on a case-by-case basis of what works for them. There's no kind of perfect template. So let me come back to you for a moment. More and more LGBT families are starting families, couples.
Yep.
You've researched, you've written this guide for them, which I've read, and the common questions then that you really wanted to address, I've obviously had a look through all the chapters and seen what you're trying to answer, but what were the most pressing ones?
I think there's been huge changes recently. So there have been legal changes, there have been scientific changes that meant it's easier for LGBT people to have children. But what hasn't quite caught up is the visibility. And I think many people who we spoke to, and our own experience of going into parenthood, was they hadn't met another LGBT family before. They didn't really have any models or any stories, particularly for families bringing up older children. So we felt there was a real gap there. If you turn on the TV and watch ads or programs, you don't really see a family like yours represented very often, and that just felt like that lack of visibility still makes it harder, I think, to work out navigating your way through what is still quite a traditional setup within schools or health services
And from
or
your
places.
from your experience and speaking to people for the book, how much prejudice would you say LGBT parents still face?
I think it's really interesting because we did talk to people who have had some really negative experiences, and really not to underplay those people who their children from LGBT families who are now grown up who'd experienced bullying at school, people whose families had been, grandparents had been really rejecting, but those
There's
were
quite an
definitely...
extraordinary example in your book as well about, feces being smeared on somebody's house. I mean, there was,
But that was very, very much the exception. So while that is still a reality, and for every instance, that's one instance too many, it was quite interesting seeing how those of us perhaps who grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, in a much less accepting time, bringing those fears and those experiences into our encounters now. And although I think LGBT families experience a lot of confusion, perhaps a lot of intrusive questions.
such as how did you make your child? I mean,
Which
101, do not ask that.
that.
Yes, because you wouldn't ask a heterosexual couple exactly where did you conceive, how did that work.
Absolutely.
David, let me bring you back in. The experiences of 10 gay men in your book.
Yeah.
Could you say what unites them all, even though they've got very specifics? Because there are themes.
Well, obviously the theme that runs through it is that their sexuality, but also the very strong theme that runs through it is that they all got married for absolutely the right reason, and that was that they fell in love. It just so happened
With a woman.
It just so happened that they fell in love with a woman and not the man, and that can be for all sorts of reasons. It can be, where they live. It can be the social grouping, whatever. But none of us get married thinking that 2, 10, 20 years down the line, this is all going to fizzle out and it's going to end in disaster.
And a practical question then. How much do schools and organisations, in your experience, always assume parents are straight, and how problematic is that?
I personally have never had a problem with schools.
And even maybe organisations linked
Yeah, I mean, I've had sort of, not difficulties, but there's been an assumption with, the NHS. If you take your child along to the doctors and you're taking your child and you're there as the dad on your own, and they might know that you're a single dad living, with your children, there is always that slight sort of, undercurrent of checking perhaps a bit more carefully than they would otherwise. But that might be a good thing, that might not be.
Sarah, you were nodding there.
Yeah, I think that's those kind of health service settings. When we spoke to people, it was the real issues they experienced were right when their children were being born, or maternity services or midwife services, and there are a lot of great midwives and a lot of great service providers who do really understand the needs of different families, but there are a lot who maybe haven't encountered some different families before and are still getting to grips with that. So
some odd comments here and there.
yeah, and just some assumptions that people don't even think through. You go to an antenatal class, it's quite an odd experience being the only non-pregnant woman in the room, the only same-sex couple in the room. You will still get an assumption that there are women giving birth and there are the dads.
Is there an improvement that you would really like to see? Very briefly, time's against me.
I think it's gradual. I think it's about gradual acceptance. So there's not one law or one moment that's going to change things, but it's just about those stories being told and being heard.
Well, you're both doing that. David, very briefly.
Yes, absolutely. And the more that people like Sarah and myself can come on shows like this and talk about our experiences, the more normal, if you like, it becomes, which is great.
I'm
So
very
thank
happy
you.
you did, and I'm sure we'll get lots of response and we'll put them together online. Sarah Hagger-Holt and David Ledain, thank you to both of you. Well, you've heard there from the parents. We now want to also hear from the children who've grown up with a gay or trans parent. Do get in touch. We want to hear your experiences. All contact details can be found on the Woman's Hour website. And we should always say this, you don't have to give your real name if you don't wish to, but if you want to, do that as well. But get in touch if you are a child of a gay or trans parent. And some of the